So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. My name's Craig Hamilton, and I'm a research fellow at Birmingham City University, and I'm going to be moderating the session today. We have around about 90 minutes, which is likely to fly by, so I'm going to try and keep my introduction as brief as possible so that we can use the time for you to hear more from our panellists. Before I introduce them in the session, I just want to briefly give you an overview of BLMP, or the Birmingham Live Music Project, because that's the project that has organised this panel, and this is the last of a series of events that we've organised as part of the work that we've been doing under that project banner. So BLMP is a collaboration between Aston University, Birmingham City University and Newcastle University. The project is led by Dr. Patrycja Rozbicka from Aston, and along with Adam Bear from Newcastle University, I'm one of the co-investigators working with Pat on the project. The work has been funded by the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, PEC, which is led by Nesta and funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And in a nutshell, the project explores the live music industry in Birmingham. And our aim is to inform the public, policymakers and the various different stakeholders involved with live music in the city about the impact of changes that are occurring at national and global levels, so that the city can continue to be one of the most vibrant places in the country to enjoy and create live music. Now, initially the project had a primary focus on matters related to Brexit. And indeed, our first event back in May 2019 and the report which came from it drew together various stakeholders from the city to map concerns and questions about Brexit. However, since January, February last year, and for fairly obvious reasons, the project has pivoted towards the subject that has come to dominate all of our lives over the last 10 or 11 months, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. For anyone working in the live music industry, or indeed the cultural economy more widely, the dual presence of Brexit and COVID present many, many challenges. Our hope then with the project is that we can work collaboratively to produce with stakeholders information, assistance and data that can help the live music sector emerge from the other end of the Brexit and COVID issues in a healthy state. So towards that end, and with a hopeful eye on a more positive future, today's panel focuses on initiatives and projects that engage with the creative and cultural sector, including live music in the West Midlands, in relation to the upcoming Commonwealth Games in 2022. But as with everything in our lives at the moment, this positivity and hopefulness will be set against the backdrop of the Brexit and COVID-19 issues. So our panellists will variously talk about Birmingham's preparations for the Commonwealth Games and its cultural programme, how engagement with various local stakeholders is going to be key to that, and the challenges and opportunities that arise both from the Commonwealth Games, but also the backdrop of Brexit and COVID. The ongoing initiatives and projects being discussed in this panel involve work being undertaken by the Commonwealth Games 2022 cultural programme, Birmingham City Council, and the Birmingham Live Music Project. By outlining their work, we hope to explore how an urban geographical area that is tied into national and international mechanisms can work to sustain its creative culture ecology in the face of those twin challenges. Our panel comprises of Martin Green, who's the Chief Creative Officer behind the Commonwealth Games 2022 cultural programme, Symon Easton, Head of Cultural Development from Birmingham City Council, and Patrycja Rozbicka, the Principal Investigator on the Birmingham Live Music Project. Now I have a handful of questions to get us going, and I'm going to ask each panellist in turn to introduce themselves when they answer the first question, so that those of you who aren't familiar with their work can understand where they're coming from. And then towards the end of the session, we'll open up to questions from the virtual floor. There are a number of ways in which you can, well, there are 2 ways, not a number, which is a number, I guess. There are 2 ways you can raise a question. You can either use the hand button to indicate that you have a question, or you can post it into the chat function. If you are called onto the screen, please remember, of course, to turn your mic on. If you're not speaking, please turn the mic off. I'm sure we're all fairly used to working within these virtual meeting environments now, but it's always worth saying. I believe that's all of the housekeeping done. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to the first question, which I'm going to put to each of the panelists in turn. This time I'd like to start with Martin, then move on to Symon, and then to Pat. So Martin, good morning. Thank you for joining us. If I could ask you first of all to briefly summarise your organisation and your role within it, to outline some of the current activities with regard to the cultural activity associated with the Commonwealth Games, and then a third part to sort of describe how the ongoing issues around Brexit and COVID are impacting upon those plans. So I'll hand over the floor to you, Martin.
Thank you so much, and I'm incredibly flattered to be here, so thanks for the invitation. It's a really important conversation to be having, and I hope it can add to the brilliant work the team there do around this, which has kept us informed over the past months and years. So I'm Martin Green. I'm the Chief Creative Officer of the Birmingham Commonwealth Games and of Festival UK 2022. I sit in the organising committee of the Games, which is an independent organisation set up to deliver the Games, and we work with our key stakeholders, most noticeably our wonderful colleagues at Birmingham City Council, the Combined Authority and the government, most notably DCMS, to deliver the Games and the festival, which last year was decided by the government after our pitch that that festival would be placed in this organisation to run. It's 2 separate teams and 2 separate projects. The very simple pitch we made was we could combine some back office and spend more money on creativity and less on administration. My Games work covers all the fun bits, basically, is the best way to describe it. So we look after the opening and closing ceremonies of the Games, the culture programme of the Games, which I'll come back to, the Queen's Baton Relay, which will go, all being well, through all 72 member nations and territories of the Commonwealth Games, the live sites, which are the free to access places for people to access the Games and cultural programme, the welcome ceremonies for all those aforementioned 72 nations and territories as they arrive in Birmingham. We're dealing with 6,500 athletes and officials. The medal ceremonies for all the winners, sports presentation, which is how we bring sport alive in venue, and finally a learning programme which we're working with key stakeholders across the region to deliver to around 1 million young people in some form of education, or indeed having fallen through the gaps of education, which is aligned to the Games. We now have a great team here operating that, and despite all the challenges of new ways of working, the Games remain on track to deliver in 2022. And, you know, it could well be that the Games are indeed the first global sporting event to happen in some semblance of normality post-COVID, which will just give it an extra level of meaningfulness as the world gathers and we bring people together. The other side of the job is Festival UK 2022. That's a £120 million project to celebrate creativity and innovation across the UK. We're currently funding 500 creatives, including over 100 freelancers, £3.5 million to come up with their ideas. It was very important. It was an openly curated festival. They come back with they're split into 30 teams. They come back with their 30 big ideas in February. We will choose 10, and those projects will be funded between £4 and £10 million and happen in 2022. The brief is very, very simple: celebrate creativity and bring people together. And it's very much a project which is telling us what it wants to be, not the other way round, which is a really interesting and fascinating process. So that's me and what we do. I think the overview on the key challenges is, obviously there is an obvious thing, which is, as a Commonwealth Games, our main international interaction is with the Commonwealth. And you could describe that however you want, but clearly it does sidestep some of the absolute issues that we are sadly gradually finding out now that Brexit is being implemented. And so, you know, in another sense, we, like any other independent arts organisations, are in the same boat, which is we are watching carefully to see what comes out and find out stories about things being offered and not accepted, and then seeing how we can deal with that. The culture programme for the Games is obviously centred around really celebrating the creativity of the West Midlands, because it's a global moment for the West Midlands to absolutely show the brilliant creativity here. Naturally, we want some of that work to be done in co-production and sharing with artists and creatives from across the Commonwealth, which brings with it actually some of the movement and visa issues which, until Brexit happened, we didn't have to deal with when we were working with artists across Europe. So again, there's that sort of slightly odd thing where, you know, what we were preparing to deal with is unfortunately now what we might have to deal with post-Brexit in Europe if we work on any project with European artists. It will kick in most noticeably on Festival 2022, because whilst Festival 22 is being conceived by 500 creatives who call this place home, once we know the 10 projects that we're going to fully fund, we've said very clearly who they want to work with in the world is completely open season. And so again, we're watching closely on the implications of that, particularly because there is an enormous amount of time before the beginning of 2022 to do some of the onerous stuff that's coming up. There is, of course, within all that, not only the pragmatic side, but the emotional side. We are dealing with great division. We are dealing with disappointment or joy. We're dealing with a binary conversation. And I have a fundamental belief that creativity is the thing that we should turn to if we are trying to find a pathway out of binary division and a way to connect people and celebrate difference and find common ground. And in a way, a lot of what I look at now as a person who's fortunate to be in a commissioning position, in a producing position, is work that can describe those pathways forward, really. Briefly on COVID, it's obviously something that both projects track very, very carefully. As a large organisation, we're lucky enough to have dedicated people in our team who can look at this. We've already had casualties. We're unable to complete the athletes' village in time for the Games. Fortunately, we're in a city stuffed full of universities, so there was an obvious plan B, and that's all been rectified and taken forward. And of course, the athletes' village is still being built as housing for Birmingham. It just won't be used for its temporary purpose for athletes, first of all. But I can also say that the other two builds, the stadium and the swimming pool, remain very, very much on track, thanks to the Herculean efforts of the people actually building those, but also Birmingham City Council and all the stakeholders involved in keeping that on track. Our main issue, I think, is, of course, we're not just dealing with people from this nation, we're dealing with people from 71 other nations and territories. And sadly, it's very clear that the impact, effect, and indeed rollout of vaccines will differ widely across that section of communities, because we have, you know, developing nations, underdeveloped nations, developed nations within that. But all you can really do is set up a very, very robust tracking process to see how we deal with that. Ultimately, if we can make sure that our officials and our athletes are safe, and that we can get a really good broadcast going, and this is exactly what Tokyo are doing for the Olympics, then those are the two key things that will make a games happen, even if there is no spectators in those venues. And there are various gateway points we have through the year where all our assessments and intelligence gathered from lots of other events as well as our own come together, and we're advised what scenario we should be working on. And at the moment, the advice is the scenario we should work on is a back to normal. But we track it very closely, not least with the Queen's Baton Relay, which is designed to move off in October of this year. So that's a very pressing thing to look at. But I'll stop there, as I'm sure more will come up later.
Thank you very much, Martin. It sounds like an absolutely massive project, but really, really exciting for Birmingham. And I particularly like the idea that, it could be the first event, the first large-scale sporting event that the world sees once we hopefully emerge from the current problems. Could I put the same question to Symon, which is just briefly, just to remind you, Symon, is just a brief overview of who you are, your organisation, your plans around the Commonwealth Games, and also how Brexit and COVID are impacting upon those. I'll hand the floor over to you, Symon.
Jolly good. Thank you, Craig. Yes, good morning, everybody. Welcome to my office, which is actually the front small box bedroom in my house, which I'm sure is a similar arrangement to where you are. But if on my Zoom connection, which is through my work computer, it may be slightly dodgy. So forgive me if I start to cut out. My wife is working in the office downstairs, and 2 children are currently on lessons as well within the house. So there may be a connection issue. So forgive me. My role is Head of Cultural Development in the City Council. I'm part of the Neighbourhoods Division, and my role with my team, a small team of officers, 3 of us in culture, 4 of us in terms of total roles, but 3 full-time equivalents, if you like, is to deal with the funding for the major arts organisations in the city, or the regularly funded organisations portfolio. So examples include the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, the Rep Theatre, the performances Birmingham Run Town Hall Symphony Hall, etc. We then also have a smaller amount of project funding that we commission each year under particular themes. So Culture on Our Doorsteps is a theme that reaches adults in, let's say, deprived neighbourhoods across the city. Next Generation reaches young people and develops cultural ambitions and cultural activity for young people. Cultural diversity is deliberately targeted at our culturally diverse communities that may not have as much access or opportunity for cultural activity across the city. And the new one this year, in this financial year, has been for the Commonwealth Games project funding stream, which I'll just talk about in a moment. We also run the museums contract. The museum service was spun out of the council back in 2012, and the Museums Trust, as you may be familiar with, run 9 sites across the city, including museum and art gallery in the city centre. And we also run the heritage aspects or other heritage aspects for the city. And we're just in the middle of refreshing our heritage strategy, for example. We run also local arts development in the city. So we have a number of local arts forums across each of the 10 districts that we help part fund. And we oversee the commissioning of a number of events in the city each year, including Black History Month in October, Birmingham Heritage Week as part of our heritage aspect, and Number 11 Arts, which is the region of the City Producers Forum, small scale producers forum we also fund to help deliver activity. We also run the Film Birmingham office, which is the office to help coordinate filming and promote filming of in the city. And we're just about to appoint, after a long while, a new tourism officer. So my remit will include the support of tourism, promotion of tourism, which will be an important aspect leading up to the Games. I sit as part of my role on the City Council's Commonwealth Games committee, which is now headed up by a chap called Craig Cooper, who's the new sort of overall project manager for the city. We liaise, as Martin's alluded to, very closely with the Commonwealth Games Culture Programme team. And a recent example of that is the Commonwealth Games commissioning that I've just mentioned. We've just commissioned 20 small to medium scale arts organisations to deliver feasibility development projects with communities across the city, developing ideas for the cultural programme that can be submitted to the main cultural programme funding, which is looked after by Martin and the team. Not all of them will succeed, but this is an early intervention from us at the City Council to work with communities, developing ideas within their communities for arts or creative projects that could hopefully be funded by the Commonwealth Games. And in terms of the answer to your question, Craig, that's been affected by obviously not being able to meet personally now. These projects started and were commissioned in November last year, and the ability to engage with communities and have dialogue with them is a lot more difficult online than it obviously is by meeting with them personally. But nevertheless, those projects are continuing. We've allowed capacity and flexibility for those projects to have to adapt and change as necessary for those program ideas to be developed. So that's the practical element of what we're doing at the moment directly within the cultural program team. Obviously, within the City Council itself, there are larger teams of, as Martin's alluded to, the teams that are building the infrastructure projects, the stadium, and so forth. And there's also a lot of infrastructure transport projects that are being changed. But we also have a legacy group. Kat Orchard, my colleague, is leading up on legacy for the Commonwealth Games. A lady called Maria Canavas has just joined us, as she will be leading on the coordination of the Queen's Baton Relay and celebrations in the city, working again with Martin's team. So it's good that we have a structure within the City Council that is progressing and learning each meeting each month, I beg your pardon, to learn about how progression is going with each of the streams and strands some of which I've mentioned. I'm going to stop there, Craig, because I'm aware that time's marching on.
Thank you very much. Again, it's really interesting to hear how complex the behind the scenes work is and how many people are involved. It's clearly a massive undertaking, this Games, and made particularly difficult by the current situation. Could I now pass over to Pat to answer once again the first question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Greg. I'm just uploading our slides because typical academic, I always have slides. So figure out this time I'll not go far away from the usual process. First of all, for those that I haven't met before, Patrycja Rozbicka, senior lecturer at Aston University and head of the Birmingham Live Music Project, where I work together with Craig and Adam, who are here with us today. Fantastic team working with me already for, I believe, almost 3 years now. I'm gonna see if everything goes correctly. Yeah, so I'm not gonna here repeat all the information which Craig mentioned at the very beginning. So just giving you, skipping the part about the background of the project and just kind of underlining a few main words. So kind of measuring the impact. What we do in the Birmingham Live Music Project is measuring the impact, sharing information, and actually building and facilitating networks of various stakeholders working around live music in the Birmingham. Our main focus and actually result of the work which we do is on economic and social cultural effects of various global industry changes and how we can actually learn from those, what are challenges and opportunities. And as Craig mentioned, Brexit and COVID are actually the ones which we encountered as some of the most important in the current stages. We do our study mostly in Birmingham. We selected the city not only because we live here and because of the upcoming Commonwealth Games, but also because it's a fantastic comparative case study to other cities like Liverpool, Manchester, and Glasgow in the UK, but also looking farther afield, like, for example, Rotterdam in Netherlands, Newcastle in Australia, or Auckland in New Zealand. So kind of looking at the city as the second city actually opens us to very interesting comparisons. For those who heard about us before, probably you recognize us mostly from our city mapping activities, but we also did some workshops, interviews, and surveys. And we pretty much spammed mailboxes of a lot of people in the city trying to find as much information as we can. So coming finally to the most important part, so not the project itself, but we figured out like this particular panel would benefit really a lot from kind of looking at the city from our perspective of the project and looking at it, okay, Commonwealth Games are coming, which is very important. And what does the city has to offer when it comes to live music, which is part of the culture program. So that's kind of where we fit with the whole project. Today I will talk very briefly about three main points. So city's live music profile. So kind of talking about what we actually have in the city to share with the rest of the world. And then, as the topic of the panel suggests, I will focus more on the impact of and challenges and some of the opportunities linked to Brexit and COVID-19. So without further ado, a brief look on the city live music profile from various perspectives. So a lot of us recognize Birmingham as a kind of home of the Black Sabbath, but it's very important to see that there's a huge historical and cultural value in the city, going actually not only starting from Black Sabbath, there are other bands, a number of them, but actually looking at the music which is being produced now, including great artists from grime scene. From our surveys, we know that around 21% of audience goers in the city focus on the indie music, but the rest is spread quite evenly across a very diversified scene of music preferences, including, for example, R&B with 2%. Next to that historical and cultural value in the city, there's obviously, as always, it's always good to mention, there's economic value in the live music in the city and the region. So from data, for example, from UK Music, we know that within West Midlands in 2019, so pre-COVID times, there were around 877,000 of music tourists. So people who travel to the region and longer distances in order to actually visit the place for a musical event. So something taking place either in theatres, operas, but also small venues, pubs and restaurants. That in 2019 generated for the whole region around £252 million, which is not a sum which is small, and it could benefit the region quite a lot. When we did our own study, focusing this time just on the Birmingham area, our audiences and surveys basically helped us with establishing what is the average spend on the event. So when you go outside for the live music event, how much money do you spend? On average, it's around £45, which by itself, by one person, is already quite an expense. But then if you multiply it by a number of events that people attend during a month and then a year, you can actually see that even at a very small scale, when we have relatively small number of responses, it already generates £250,000 minimum per night when we have a city in full operation. And I want to underline, it's just the minimum per year. So that's kind of a very small number multiplied by a number of people who obviously haven't had a chance to respond to our survey. Another important part, and that's why I'm mentioning, especially in relation to Commonwealth Games and Brexit and COVID, so areas being affected in Birmingham. Next to the cultural, historical value and economical value, the live events have to take place somewhere. So we actually mapped the city, including all the live music venues across the city, with wider B postcode, that's around 195 of them. Within B postcode 1 to 48, it's 158 of them. It's a huge range of various venues, including social and student clubs, which is around 14%, to some of the more known, like large and medium live music venues, like, for example, Utility Arena in the city centre. Those constitute around 4%. However, the most importantly, and that's kind of number which I want everyone to kind of remember, more than a half of those venues within the city that actually have the live music are actually pubs, bars, and small venues. So that's actually when the kind of main part of the live music is taking part in the city. I promise I'm not going to get you all the statistics, and I'm going to move very quickly about it. Here's a short slide just to show you Birmingham in comparison to the cities from which we have data, from Liverpool, Glasgow, Newcastle, Gateshead, and Oxford. Here, worth of remembering is like already the outstanding number of bars and pubs which actually have live music in the city. And then interestingly, Birmingham sticks out in comparison very much on the scale when thinking about other types of spaces when the live music takes place. And in case of Birmingham, it's actually parks when we have our festivals taking place. And that makes the city even more unique in comparison to like huge musical conglomerates, like for example, Liverpool. When you look at one of screenshots of our map of the city of the venues, here, very important thing to remember for later on in the presentation is the fact that majority of the venues is actually within the city center, so the main ring. And it's quite important later on when coming to, for example, impact of COVID. And add to that one, very importantly, in the northern part of the city, slightly less venues, including whole areas without any particular live music activity. So just kind of keeping that in mind. Now, without further ado, a very quick run through some of the findings when it comes to Brexit and the impact on the live music in the city. Some of the things are obviously scratched from the list, like for example, Summer Festival, which didn't take place. The question is now about Summer Festival of 2021, if it's going to actually take place. So we can't really see it as a purely Brexit effect. It's actually linked more to the COVID. The same goes to those fantastic 252 million in the region being at risk when it comes to music tourism. But when we focus just on Brexit linked issues, some of the things to keep in mind, the direct effect on the city. First of all, disrupted supply chains, not only to the venues, when we understand them as a center of the large networks of supply chains with food, amenities, and so on, but it also means about, it also asks questions about supply chains for the larger touring acts, and how this one kind of will be fixed because of Brexit. Very big question of high-end production companies, which we had in the region 3 before Brexit and COVID started. Currently, there's already only 2 of them, one kind of not being there anymore. Very big risk related to reputational damage, cultural pushback, but most of all, something which we're really afraid of when it comes to Birmingham is the homogenization of music scene. If people don't want to come and play in the UK, we have less touring bands coming in. So that's one thing. Scene is becoming a bit less diversified, but also bands from Birmingham have problem traveling abroad and kind of gaining new experiences, culture, interactions, and diversity. Administrative, of course, are rather obvious, so I'm not going to go here furthermore in the details. But 2 other things which are very important from our perspective, and it's one of the main findings, it's first of all, lack of reliable information on the impact of what's going to happen and where to actually find the information. And the same goes with the lack of bandwidth to actually negotiate the issues related to live music, as for example, the very recent negotiations on the musicians touring, kind of being pushed back when everything seems to be working, and then there's downfall when we still don't have anything done because live music was pushed back on the side. Kind of coming to the final slide, I'm really sorry I'm speaking very fast, but I wanted to make sure that we keep time. When it comes to COVID and challenges to the live music and culture in broader sense in the city, there's kind of like a triple level, the sub-local, local, and linked to that also national level, which impacts events at the city level. So the sub-local one comes actually from very simple things. When we were conducting the research on the topic, we encountered a number of issues while problematic for us, are also very problematic for different actors linked to live music ecology in the city. So one of the things, how to reply, a relatively simple thing, but how do you communicate with the people when everyone, simply because of lack of income, doing other stuff in the meantime, has a how to reply on? Organization of predominantly, for example, what we did before in the project is the offline workshops, when it's much better to start up interactions, people working together, it's a real workshop. Now we had to shift everything to online, and then how do you actually build the community within the online network, and how you maintain it was one of the 2 things which we kind of came across. And it's very important to see it from the perspective of, for example, venues which has to have to connect with the audiences, but also venue owners which have to work, for example, okay, the new regulations are coming, where do I go to find the information? When it comes to the local level, so Birmingham and music region, we looked into the aspects of, okay, we know how many venues are in the city. We know that there are various regulations and tiers implementation were related to COVID. So who is actually going to be affected? How many venues will be affected? So we calculated that pre-COVID-19, because we were quite lucky in the sense when we were collecting data, we started just before the COVID. On a good night, around 98,000 people could have been out in the city attending live music events. Various restrictions introduced to the process either cut it in total, so no live public events, or even in the good times when we had some of the restrictions in the summer lifted, that still meant 1/3 of that capacity being active, based, for example, on the fact that only 47% of venues have actually outdoor space in the city. A very big issue for kind of all the people we talked with is actually overview of the different governmental protocols and the continuous change between them. But that's especially getting more problematic at the regional and local level when some of the venues simply don't have a capacity within them to follow the track of it. So it would be good to have a one contact point. Further on, interesting to remember is the fact that the venue as a center, why it's being locked, is just kind of ending the supply chain line. So a venue which basically cannot put live music event on, doesn't order, for example, the drink supply, there's no food on it. It's not only the musicians which can't perform, but also staff of the venues. So engineers who would be there normally, managers, the staff, and so on. Finally, the kind of jumping here further on to the national level, all those elements I talked about, while having direct impact at the regional level, actually linked to the national policy and protocols being implemented, which very often do not consider live music or live performances as a kind of side effect of what's going on. And in that sense, there's a need for larger attention at the national level to have a form of live music impact assessment whenever a new protocol is being introduced. The final point which I want to make is about the audience confidence. So a lot of people and different surveys which are running around were basically talking about the fact that the most important is after COVID is building out audience confidence about them being happy to come back to the venues and so on. In our survey, when we asked about it, a lot of the vast majority, I would say over 80% of people we asked about it, basically said, yes, we want to come back to the venues, we want to go out and so on. But interestingly enough, most of them also said that they want to make sure that all the restrictions, all the protocols are being implemented. So in that sense, a very simple fix with information sharing could be quite interesting. So that's kind of very, very quickly feedback from Birmingham Live Music and how actually different areas related with the cultural performance will be affected, are affected by Brexit and COVID. And later on, we can see that not necessarily all of them will be there when Commonwealth Games actually will finally start. Okay, thank you, Craig. That would be all for me.
Thank you, Pat. That was a really interesting. I mean, obviously, I know a lot of this being involved in the project with you, but hopefully that was useful to everybody to sort of get an overview of the situation on the ground here in Birmingham. And it kind of leads to the next question, which I'd like to put to perhaps Symon first, and then Martin, and then Pat. You can perhaps anything that wasn't covered in your talk you could add. But given that we're on this kind of timeline at the moment that seems to be dealing with the issues of COVID and recovery from it, unpicking the issues around Brexit, and then moving hopefully towards this positive experience of the Commonwealth Games, I wonder whether, Symon, you could first of all talk about how you've seen the sort of the economic and social cultural effects of the current issues on the creative economy in Birmingham, and what the challenges have been in terms of creating and maintaining some coping mechanisms for the sector. And then moving forward, how those coping mechanisms can kind of manifest in a way that helps the cultural sector through the Commonwealth Games. So maybe this is more for Martin, to help leave a legacy of a thriving nighttime economy and a creative cultural sector that's kind of sustainable for the city. So I wonder whether, Symon, if I could kind of throw perhaps the difficult part of the question at you first about how the issues manifest and what the challenges are in terms of the coping mechanisms.
Yeah, no problem, Craig. Pat's already picked up on a lot of the really valid points as far as the effect of Brexit is concerned. So looking through the lens of a local authority rather than the sort of wider issue, perhaps the effect of Brexit is not as great as the major impact and the significant impact that we're now addressing through COVID. Which, if dealing with the impacts of Brexit weren't going to enough, this major COVID situation for local authorities up and down the land is very significant. And just to give a bit of backstory to the City Council local authority position, we'd already just come out of, or were beginning to come out of, the austerity agenda, which sort of started in late 2008. And when I started at the authority in 2010, the budget for the arts, support to the arts, was just under 10 million, 9.7 million. And because of the austerity agenda and cutbacks on local authority council budgets, as of this year, it's 2.8. So a reduction of almost around 70% in the budgets that we had. So that was already a significant impact. Of course, culture is a non-statutory role for local authorities, and therefore has suffered. And it's not just Birmingham, it is every local authority down the land. And people in my position, in fact, local authority arts officers have significantly reduced in their number. In fact, my team went down from a size of nearly 4. I say my team, the team I was working in, went down from a size of sort of 14 down to the 4 that I've mentioned now, and 3 of those are part-time. So I'm not crying here. I'm just sort of explaining the backstory to the situation. So and now the impact of COVID, and I don't think it's necessarily recognised that local authorities have a significant amount of trading income that they rely on, aside from the government grants. And that can be anything from obviously rent and rates and hires of premises to licenses to car parking income, which we know is also a bone of contention, but obviously provides local authorities with gaps to try and fill loss of local government grants that have been severely effective. So it's a pretty dire situation, and we're heavily reliant now on government grants, government support. The latest cultural relief fund for the sector in terms of culture has obviously been a very important aspect of this year, sustaining the arts and cultural sector, and we wait to see what next from the government in terms of can that continue. But obviously, with already now the highest national debt since the Second World War or whatever it was, we're going to be really struggling. But we are reliant. The local authority has no more additional resources other than the grants it's able to try and distribute through the business, small scale business grants, and they are unfortunately only small scale. But my colleagues within the council are working very hard to make sure businesses, including those cultural sector businesses, are able to apply for whatever is on offer. So I won't go in about Brexit, the challenges of restriction of free movement of people that creates additional bureaucracy and all that Pat's already alluded to. I just wanted to sort of finish this bit, if I may, on an optimistic viewpoint. And I mean, I suspect that the culture sector can and will recover quicker from this current situation than many other perhaps business sectors, including perhaps retail in the city centre. And I, except for those businesses that were, that are perhaps going to have to close or wind up by the time we've all managed to come out of this, of course. But I'm trying to be optimistic, as I say, because we have always been and I worked in the culture sector directly myself for 20 or more years before I did the local authority role. But we've always been more fleet of foot, or more agile, more flexible, and perhaps a bit more transient to be able to deal with the changes that we encounter in our cultural lives. And as Darwin said, it's not necessarily the strongest or the fittest that survive. It's those that are more adaptable to change. So as I say, I'm trying to end on a more optimistic note that we can be more flexible, we can come out of this quicker, and hopefully revive sooner than perhaps other sectors. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. I'm a bit slow turning my video and audio back on. But I can sort of pass the question on to Martin, because you mentioned in your intro that you have a large team working for you, and you're having to deal with some of the effects of COVID and Brexit in terms of your planning. So I wonder whether you could share some of the more specific detail of that, but also whether those sort of coping and management mechanisms, how they're going to manifest in a way that helps the nighttime economy thrive as we move towards and move through the Commonwealth Games.
Some constituent parts, I guess. I mean, the first thing to acknowledge is that we are extraordinarily fortunate as an organisation that we are working on a project that comes to fruition in 2022. And therefore, we can be a little bit more hopeful every day that by the time we get there, we will be operating in some sense of normality when it comes to work that is put on and the audiences for that work. Now, I think there's another way to put that, which is whilst there are so many people who have to concentrate on tomorrow, and a load more people who have to concentrate on next week and next month, there are a few of us who have got their eye on next year, so that when we do emerge from the major impacts of COVID, there is something to do, both in terms of very practically paid work for creatives, but also an opportunity and the occasion to show off that work and audiences to see that work. Now, again, in a commissioning production prep process, there is much of the prep and production for the work we're doing in 22, which needs to happen this year and can, as hard as it is, be done in this way that we have to work, conceiving of work, pre-production of work, etc., etc. And we know that there are gradually some exceptions around rehearsing and things like that, although for our timeline, that still is a way off. So actually, the mega event coming to Birmingham, and remember, there is nowhere else in the UK that has this great thing. In fact, of course, we've got a double whammy because we'll lead on from Coventry City of Culture. Has offered a lot of positivity because we have been able to commission creatives to be able to work now and look forward to being able to present that work next year. Clearly, we're obviously seeing impacts. The cultural festival within the Games sadly doesn't come with any funding like the rest of the Games does. So we are having to raise a pot of money for any work that we want to commission or co-commission as part of the festival. And it's absolutely clear that whilst we've been able to be successful with some of the big lottery providers, a lot of those usual avenues for funding of major cultural festivals, that money has been diverted to immediate COVID relief in trusts and foundations. And of course, the bottom has absolutely fallen out of the commercial sponsorship market. So there's no doubt that we have to be wiser and nimbler in looking at how we achieve what we want to achieve in the Games. there was that heart-stopping moment before the major recovery money was made available, because obviously until that point, although that money didn't reach everybody and didn't reach really significant sectors in the creative community, you know, it was at the end of the day 1.57 billion. But before that was announced, obviously our main issue was there going to be any organisations or creatives left for us even to be able to commission in 2022? But now at least there was that for certain sectors and certain people. We can now come off the back of that. And of course, what our funding and activity can do is provide work for people, not just money to survive. I think that, you know, I'm trying to put as positive slant on it as possible, really. I think timing is everything here. It's important to know that obviously a lot of the mega event is not about the direct funding that makes specific work possible. It's about the excuse and the occasion. The world will be watching Birmingham in 2022. There is a whole load of work, as Pat's just gone through, an activity that happens on a daily basis anyway. And the opportunity is there to be had by anyone, funded or not, to say, what am I going to do to capture these new audiences, to capture the tourists that are coming in? And then if you draw the lens out again, I think you've got this really interesting period between the Games and the arrival of HS2, this sort of 10-year period. We are a politically expedient area. So the stars are aligning for Birmingham to go through what you might call a Manchester and Liverpool moment, where it becomes the cultural centre of the universe. And we really have this period. The city's changing physically, etc., etc. So it also requires that great entrepreneurial spirit of various sectors to say, right, how can I essentially screw this moment for everything it's worth for me? Because on this, there is a positive selfishness attached to this. The thing is happening, it's not going to happen. How can I make it work for me? And we've seen on Cities of Culture and other things, it is that more entrepreneurial end of things and attitude that ultimately makes the best, longer term choices and decisions within that. Going forward from the catalyst of the mega event through the ensuing period.
Thank you very much. If I could just pass that question now along to Pat, to maybe talk about something of the coping mechanisms that we've seen through the project at a local level, and also, for example, Martin mentioned the Cultural Recovery Fund. So we've seen through previous meetings, for example, the Music Venue Trust helping small venues negotiate a funding process which they may not have been familiar with. Can you sort of highlight some examples, Pat, from the local area or from the BLMP work that demonstrate some of these coping mechanisms and will perhaps help ensure, as Martin alluded to, that there will be businesses and creatives still operating by the time this mega event happens?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So during the research, when we were doing it, we focused on a number of issues linked with the COVID and kind of looking up into the future. One of the things we worked on, as you mentioned, was the Creative Recovery Fund, and kind of looking at where the money is, for example, distributed, what type of organizations, and how is it spread across the city, with this main focus on kind of sustaining the venues to kind of remain still on the stage. One of the things which we discovered was that while the fund is very generous, and obviously a lot of venues would not be able to sustain its presence across the process, it explicitly, for example, focused on more traditional live music venues. So like, for example, Symphony Hall, Town Hall, and in a degree also small, medium and large live music venues. But as we know, for example, from my presentation, that money didn't land with, for example, bars and pubs in the city, which are predominant live music spots in the city, simply because the main business is not linked to delivery of live music. But it's important to kind of notice it, that in the city, when majority of those venues actually delivers live music, it's important to kind of keep in mind that they did not necessarily got that support line in order to sustain their creative input, not just as a pub and a restaurant. Another good thing, and it also came up in some of the workshops which we did before, is a very big role. When I identified in the presentation, one of the things is like lack of the central information point. So especially coming with the issues from lack of straightforward, stable and unchangeable communication from the government, is actually how various organizations which are outside of this general scope actually activated quite well, including, for example, Musicians Union. And I think Ben from there is actually today with us, but also Music Venue Trust, which got extremely huge positive response from all the members on how important that organization, so a non-state actor, which activated a lot, helped a lot of organizations in actually submitting the applications for the funding, which is quite good. Another thing, and kind of looking into more positive aspect, is how, because of COVID, a lot of venues started being like a bit more creative, entrepreneurial, especially in the very early stages of the process. So when we went into lockdown, a lot of venues, well, I'm not going to say majority of them, but some of the venues started streaming their events, so kind of doing recording in the venue and then just streaming it. Some of them started selling merchandise, which they haven't done before. A lot of them started including also things like cooking food and selling it into like takeaway option, which is important. And so there were, especially in the very initial wave of COVID, there were a lot of positive developments. But kind of here a note of caution, which we kind of got very strongly from all the venue owners that we talked with. It's not a sustainable model, because it only addresses and approaches the sponsors or gig goers who have been there before, they have seen the venue before, but it does not expand that network. So there is a limited resource there, and without music tourism, that's kind of a very big issue in the city. Again, linking to the option that at certain point, there simply won't be any more venues to which the cultural program of Commonwealth Games could be potentially delivered. So kind of summing up the point.
Thank you, Pat. And I think definitely what we've seen through the project, and again, it's what Martin and Symon have alluded to. There's this twin, or this bringing together of the entrepreneurial spirit, this kind of guidance around how to assist, how to access some of the assistance that's available, and also a sense that, you know, from both the stakeholders and gig goers and people who consume culture, that, you know, we want to kind of keep these things going with the Commonwealth Games and the cultural events around it being this tremendous carrot, I suppose, of an opportunity, an extra incentive to survive through the current period. So I'd like to end on, before we open things out to the floor, I'd like to sort of end on a positive note, if we can, because hopefully we are moving towards more positive times. And maybe briefly, if I could ask Symon, then Pat, and then to finish with Martin, to just briefly describe and think about some of the opportunities presented to Birmingham and the West Midlands by the Commonwealth Games and by this kind of desire to ride out the current experience. And again, as Martin said, the focus of the world is going to be on the city and the region, perhaps for the first time in history. Self-deprecating Brummies might find that strange, but what experiences from the region that will come out of our route towards and through the Commonwealth Games can kind of help inform things that happen on a national and perhaps international level. So maybe just an opportunity for a bit of blue sky thinking and optimism before we open to the floor. Symon.
Yeah, fine. Thanks, Craig. I think there's some fundamental benefits for the city and the region, and that's the infrastructure developments. Obviously, a new stadium, new facilities for sports and activities, as well as the sort of city transport infrastructure improvements and etc. And let's not underestimate the significant investment that is bringing to the city that otherwise may not have happened. I think in simple terms, as Martin's already said, the mere fact that we've got the games and we've got the Festival of Culture means that the commissioning of arts, the activity of arts and cultural activities is going to be much more prevalent than it otherwise perhaps wouldn't be if we didn't have them. So that's a more fundamental advantage. I think the increased tourism for me, the increased profile of Birmingham and the region, following on from the City of Culture for Coventry, and let's hope that they're able to really push that event this year. So the profile of the region and the work that the West Midlands Growth Company is doing, the award of the TTI bid, Trade and Tourism Industry bid, which if it's successful is bringing another £23 million worth of investment. If that is successful, and to all intents and purposes we hope that there's going to be a positive, that is a significant investment in, again, the growth and investment of particularly tourism and cultural activity in this region. So I'm trying to be positive and optimistic, Craig, as you've asked for, but hopefully the awareness raising of Birmingham's position both nationally and internationally will mean that the legacy of not just the games but this whole set of activities that are coming up will be a good platform for us to build on collectively, because let's not underestimate the significance of inward investment and tourism into places like Birmingham, and not just from your individual day or weekly visitors, of course, but also to the business investment, the business tourism, the seminars and conferences, which will be a key factor in our economy going forward. So in terms of the final point, really about the future, can we learn from experience from this? No doubt we can. And I think what's key, what's going to be important in the circumstances is the lessons we are learning now about how to present a games and a major event under severe restrictions, both in terms of the movement of public, but also in terms of the financial ability to do stuff. And I think that will help inform other cities around the world about how to, and also inform us in the first instance. We will have a new stadium to put new sports events on, and how we capitalize on that is going to be very important. If I'm being slightly negative, I do wonder about the future of the Commonwealth Games itself. I mean, Birmingham took up the baton from Durban, who decided to pull out. So we're in fact 4 years ahead of where we intended to be in hosting the games. No doubt that as Martin well knows, the production of games, the hosting of games is a very, very expensive activity. And I think this is a watershed moment for the Commonwealth Games, for the International Commonwealth Games Committee to look at how cities can afford the games and to present the games going forward. Last but not least, the benefits are, of course, the social aspects for the community. I think there's a real hope that we can use the opportunity of the games, and particularly the Commonwealth subject, to help integrate and socially create community cohesion through activities, particularly cultural activities, and opportunities, obviously, for young people to develop their skills and for people to develop their engagement in community activities better, whether it be volunteering or whether it be, other aspects. I'll stop there because I know other people want to say stuff.
Thank you. Same question to Pat. I mean, perhaps from the academic research point of view, what are the plans around how this might be studied? What are the potential benefits from sort of academics being involved with studying these activities and perhaps sharing them with other cities and other areas?
Yeah, so very, very, very briefly, one of the things which seems to be extremely unique in the current situation and looking forward to the Commonwealth Games is unprecedented funding available, both linked to the COVID and Commonwealth Games itself related to culture sector. It's something which is very new for the whole West Midlands and Birmingham in particular, like just the amount of money being available to do it. So there's a focus on one of the elements. Building brand of the city, so kind of looking into the aspect of viewing Birmingham as a potential live music city. So kind of, I know we considered the second city, we are not Liverpool, but actually our numbers and venues existing and so on show that the city has a potential to actually be higher on the list of like the cities in the country. So there is a background and we can actually explore it. And one of the things actually looking at it from the broader perspective is doing a comparative cases with other cities with similar profile as Birmingham and how they actually increase their brand as a live music city. And the final kind of very positive way of thinking about the issue, one of the things which is result both of the COVID and upcoming putting them together strangely, and upcoming Commonwealth Games is the fact that the networks related with live music and creative culture in the city become very active. So there is the whole exchange. People who normally would maybe meet once every half a year started working together in order to have this bigger representation of live music within the city. And I think that's one of the nicest. There's not many good positive things coming up from both Brexit and COVID. But one of the results, which is absolutely fascinating, is how the networks are starting being more solidified, the meetings are happening more often, and how this in the future can actually contribute in having a much better coordination. And for example, applications for larger projects and so on will be easily done when we have a larger coordinated group. So yeah, I think that's my optimistic note to end.
Thank you, Pat. And then finally to Martin on the same question. I mean, I'm sure I speak for everybody involved in this panel today, whether speakers or just people viewing in. You know, we're all really hoping that this is a huge success for the city, and we wish you all the best with the project, this massive project that you're working on. But I suppose the question would be, you know, what would you like to see be the end result of this process and the legacy it leaves behind? And what would a successful cultural festival look like as far as you're concerned?
Well, I mean, I think, and you know, thanks for what you said. You know, don't forget what everybody on this call wants to come out with at the end of the games is to be able to say in the pub afterwards, you know, what they did and what their contribution was, because it truly is a collective act. Cities simply don't work if they're not collective acts at some point. And the mega event doesn't work if it's not a collective act. Remember, you know, cities don't bid for mega events because they want to stage 11 days of sport. They do it because it's time, it's timely. They are a catalyst for change. They are, you know, they represent many, many, many things. I think, you know, at this time in this city, I think the key thing that I'd like the Games and the Cultural Festival and indeed Festival 2022 to contribute to is the case for culture. Defunding culture by 70% during austerity is a choice, not an inevitability. Now, I want to be clear that that's not a blame thing there. What it goes back to is how can we make the case so it is, you know, as clear a case as everybody made in Manchester and everybody made in Liverpool and everybody made in Glasgow and everybody made in Edinburgh, right? And that is absolutely about those hard cases around economics, about tourism and inward investment and return on investment, but it's also about how culture is the cheapest pill you can possibly buy, and it's the best tool for social cohesion, mental health and well-being, and bringing people together. And you get a much more powerful effect from culture for a fraction on what you spend on health services and social services. And of course, that they are further integrated. And this ultimately is how great world cities find themselves to be great world cities. It's because they believe and act and invest in the cultural life of its city. And this is the hurdle Birmingham, I hope, will use the Games to make the case to the people we need to convince to do so. Now, what we can do, is platform that. We can showcase. The mega event is very much about showcasing. It's not, everything for everybody. It's about choosing those moments and being part of the case. And I hope it will start a sort of an inevitable and undeniable momentum for the city to push its shoulders back and its chest forward and say, we are the second biggest city in the UK and we need to act in every way and invest in every way in that, because it is ultimately an investment, because the case has been made. And the final point I made is, there's also an opportunity. The case has been made. There has been mega event after mega event, city of culture after city of culture, and the reports say the same thing. You get the return on the investment. It's absolutely positive in health and well-being. So to quote David Lammy, implement the report. Let's not produce another report that says the same thing. Let's try and get a very active sense of legacy and reporting, which doesn't simply repeat that everything's fine, because to a certain extent that's falling on deaf ears as well, because the case has absolutely been made that this investment has a massive return already before we even do it, because we look at other examples. So I think there's lots to grab onto, and I think there's an enormous amount of potential, and there are an enormous amount of people who are working towards that goal.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to open the questions out to the floor now. I'm sure many of you watching have either general or specific questions. If there's been a couple sent through the chat, which I could use to start the ball rolling. But for those of you who do want to ask a question, please just drop me a message in the chat. I think we had a question from Stephen Brown, if he is still around, and a kind of related question from Angela Jeffrey. So if I allow Stephen to ask a question first of all, and then Angela, if you could indicate whether that replicates your question or the answer answers your question, if that makes sense. So Stephen, are you there?
I am, Craig. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Very fascinating panel discussion, and thank you for that. I've learned some things today, which has been very, very helpful. Part of the question may have been answered by Symon, actually, that I was going to ask Martin, but I will ask Martin the question anyway, because Martin and myself have been engaged in some level of discussion about the engagement of creatives. And I'm sorry, Martin, it's quite a parochial question that I'm going to ask that relates to kind of local creatives. We in the MU, because I work for the Musicians Union, I'm the regional organiser, are quite conscious of the fact that about half of our members in the West Midlands, the self-employed creatives, have not received anything from the self-employed income support scheme. And some projections are suggesting that 2 out of 5 cultural workers on this patch, could well be out of work come the end of COVID. And obviously it's quite encouraging that there may be work opportunities, not just at the City of Culture, which you mentioned, but, with the Commonwealth Games. But you said in your initial presentation that it will be open season for those successful creatives that have been successful in the bids. My question relates really to the engagement of local creatives, and when I say local, obviously I'm talking about Birmingham and the Midlands, West Midlands. I'd like to know how you will ensure that there will be, appropriate level of local creative professional employment, and they get a fair crack of the whip, really, when work is being allocated and creative projects are being implemented. Really, that's the core of my question, despite the very long preamble. I'm sorry.
Well, of course, usefully, the cultural part of the mega event, as far as the Games goes, its whole purpose is to celebrate the creativity of this place. So in a way, it's not even a choice, because it's the very creative principle. So the culture programme, as we've said, and it's all out there, is absolutely about celebrating the creativity of this place. So whether we are working with organisations who do work all the time and can just align their work with the festival, or we are commissioning or co-commissioning, it's absolutely creatives who call this place home, to whom we are turning, hopefully then engendering collaborations between other people across the UK and the Commonwealth, because no creativity ever didn't get stronger from welcoming in friends from afar, but its very basis is celebrating the creativity of here and what's going on here. Similarly, on the ceremonies, we're just putting the finishing touches to the creative team for opening and closing ceremony. The rule from the outset was they must be from here, because I think if you're making a show from that, you need a sensibility. Doesn't mean they may not live here now, but they're born here and things like that, because you need that. And then, of course, you flow down. There's a really good pragmatic driver as well. If we work with great creatives from Birmingham, we're not tending to fly them anywhere or travel them anywhere or accommodate them, which means I can spend more money on creativity and less on flights and accommodation. So the whole thing is set up really, really well to bring in as many local creatives as we possibly can.
Thank you, Martin. Stephen, I'm going to move on to another question now, if that's okay with you. Maybe Angela, because I believe you had a question for Symon.
Yes. So my question was more specific around, is there going to be any further funding for small projects for arts organisations going forwards? Because you mentioned there'd been some in November, but if people missed that, would there be another opportunity?
Actually, curiously, Symon, is that one for me to come back on? Because your project and my project are linked, aren't they?
Just let me just say that we had 100,000 this year to support the specific Commonwealth Games development of programme ideas. That budget I've just literally had confirmed last month is also going to continue in 2022. So the answer, Angela, is yes, there will be funding available for supporting Commonwealth Games activity and communities in Birmingham. And just to ride that with what Stephen was asking, I think there is an issue for us to look at with the independents and how we can support the independents who have really struggled this last 12 months and will continue to do so. We do, as Birmingham City Council funding, only fund Birmingham-based arts organisations because we want to support the Birmingham-based arts sector. And many of our project schemes rely on the recruitment of shadow artists. So that is whether they be musicians or artists or performers or whatever, that are learning and are given an opportunity to engage in a project that perhaps as an individual they wouldn't otherwise have got. We may need to look to expand that to make sure that we're supporting our independents better. Martin, over to you.
Well, one of the most brilliant things, and it's working better here than in any other city I've ever been lucky enough to work in, is the close relationship between Symon City's culture team and our culture team in the OC. And as he says, what so cleverly happened is obviously we're trying to get some money to commission things for the games time itself. So what Symon's team essentially said, well, look, instead of us trying to do the same thing, why don't we use our money to put some early development money in so people are ready for that moment? And I know, therefore, they're also talking about what happens after that as well. So you've got this brilliant textbook example of how it should work. If everybody plays their bit, then we're the sum of the parts. Now, in addition, Birmingham City Council have funded our cultural programme £2 million, and that is specifically for a Birmingham-based creative communities project that will see around 100 grants of between £10,000 and £20,000 given to communities who get together with creatives to make work for the Games Time Festival period that engages community, because as you might expect, we want to see work that is along a continuum of absolutely celebrating, you know, these big world-class organisations we've got in Birmingham, but also making sure that we are connecting with communities and platforming new talent, and really crucially, all on the same platform. So a great community creative project stands next to and equally to something Carlos Acosta might do with the Birmingham Royal Ballet. Now so that's the Creative Communities programme that Birmingham City Council have enabled us to do, and how it dovetails with what Symon does in the lead up and afterwards in terms of development and legacy. And then obviously we are currently fundraising to see if we can get additional money to that, to commission and co-commission. And again, like I said before, because the whole basis is platform and celebrate the creativity of this place, the team has spent the last year and a half. I doubt there are many cultural people who we haven't either spoken to, engaged with, or know about the potential opportunities that are coming up, as well as the alignment. You know, regardless of COVID, there is still, what is it, £34 million worth of Arts Council money that goes into Birmingham every year. And so there is an annual programme, and we want to see how much of that can be drawn into the programme, as well as how we work with the year-long festivals programme to draw it in and build out the programme.
Sorry, Craig, I just need to come in. I'm neglected to mention, which is stupid of me. Besides the 2 million that Martin has mentioned that is going direct from the council to the OC for the cultural programme, the City Council is just about to announce, it went to Cabinet in December, which is why the details aren't out yet, but there will be a further 1.6 million that will be devolved locally to local communities through local ward councils. I think from memory there are 63 ward councillors across the city. Each of those ward councillors are able to put forward proposals and submissions for how they want that element or pot of money to be used that they're allocated within their local ward with the community, which will include cultural and other activities, celebration activities. Now, I'm afraid the details are sketchy at the moment. They haven't been released yet, but they are about to be released. My colleague that I mentioned, Kat Orchard, leading the legacy team, is busy putting that sort of prospectus and funding criteria together. So that is going to be announced fairly shortly. And as I say, we'll start from April next year. So again, I hope that's a little bit of good news locally in Birmingham.
Thank you. We're nearing the very, very end of the session. We've got around about 3 minutes left, and there doesn't appear to be any further questions in the chat. So I wonder whether I could ask the three panelists. Well, first of all, I will thank the three panelists, Martin, Symon, and Pat, for their time today. It's been a fantastic discussion, and I hope those of you who have been watching have found it useful. We'll be putting it online after the fact, so you'll be able to share it around to people who were unable to join us today. But maybe in the remaining time that we've got before we sign off, if I could ask the three panelists just to close off with perhaps a very, very short message to the creative community in the city about how we might move forward together positively towards this event. If I go with, we'll go with Symon, Pat, and then Martin. Putting you on the spot first, Symon, but what would be your sort of closing statement, call to arms, so to speak, in terms of how the city and the creative sector within it move towards 2022?
Okay, I'm just going to recap on some of the points I've made. I mean, if I may sort of start with a negative, and we have to be honest that not all of our cultural organisations and small-scale sector and independents are going to survive in terms of their career. You know, similar to other sectors and industries across the country. I think we need to be honest about that. But having said that, to try and be optimistic, we've got the opportunity of the Commonwealth Games and the Cultural Festival, which other regions don't have, and indeed the Coventry City of Culture for this region, which we should capitalise on. And as I say, I think we are more flexible in the cultural sector than other business sectors. We are more adaptable. And our survival techniques are stronger. So I think that's a real positive for us to work on. We've got these opportunities to come together on and really help raise the profile of Birmingham and the West Midlands to help project our future cultural sector and identity. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, very briefly.
Coordination and communication. That's my two magical words. So coordination between various actors so they actually know what's going on, and most of all, communication between them. Because some of the things which we found out in our project is the fact that there's so many things going on, and venues don't know they're taking place. The artists don't know that the venues are doing things, and it goes further on to like higher levels. So kind of policymakers, for example, not knowing how the policies created affect the more local actors, like the local venues and musicians. So the coordination of those tasks and communication.
And I'd certainly second that. I mean, also it's worth giving a shout out to Culture Central, who are a brilliant umbrella organisation for creativity in the West Midlands, and have done an amazing job setting up the Culture Response Unit, which really helped people find a voice. And I would encourage everyone to get involved in them. They're currently looking for board members, by the way, so get on there. I think Grip It. You know, no one need, you know, everybody can find a place in this, but you don't need to wait to be asked. So absolutely be entrepreneurial and grip the opportunity is really important. I think there absolutely is a need for, and it's also the mega event is always a great excuse for sectors within the creative community to sort out how they communicate with each other and how they organise. There were two really strong group organisations that came out of Liverpool City of Culture 08. So it's a really good excuse to finally nail that. That being said, be wary of that other half of it, which is, it always surprises me when someone chooses to use social media to tell me they don't know what's going on, when actually if they typed what's going on in Birmingham for the games, they would have had their answer. So I think, you know, everyone's got a part to play, and grip it and make sure you've got your story to tell when this is over. Ask anyone around the London Olympics.
Thank you very much. Martin, Simon and Pat, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Keep an eye on the BLMP project website, social media for other activities around what we're doing. Good luck to everybody in their various tasks running towards 2022. And thank you for joining us today. That's the end of the session. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.